My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 31 years old, and last Thanksgiving, at a dinner table full of people I had known for 6 years, my brother in law stood up and told my husband I had been stealing from our family's business. He even had documents, spreadsheets with my name on them, printed and handed around the table like evidence at a trial. Within 30 seconds, every person in that dining room was staring at me. My husband's mother had her hand over her mouth. His father had gone completely still, and my husband, the man who had promised to stand beside me 9 years earlier in a white chapel in Vermont, looked at me like he didn't know who I was. But I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even put down my fork. Because 2 weeks before that dinner, I had already figured out what was really going on, and I had been waiting for exactly this moment. Let me back up, because the story doesn't start at that dinner table. It starts 6 years ago. The first time I met my brother in law. My husband Owen's family runs a small commercial landscaping business outside of Columbus, Ohio. His parents started it in the late 80s, built it slowly over 30 years, and by the time Owen and I got married, it was a legitimate operation with a dozen full time employees and a few long term contracts with office parks and municipal properties around the county. Owen handles client relationships and project management. His parents, though technically retired, still have their names on the accounts and like to stay informed. And his younger brother, Trevor, joined the business 4 years ago to handle bookkeeping and vendor contracts. When Trevor first came on, Owen was genuinely happy about it. He talked about how it felt right, having family involved, keeping what his parents built inside the family. I tried to feel the same way, but from the very first Sunday dinner after Trevor joined, something felt off to me. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. He'd make small comments about how I had never worked in the business the way he had, about how Owen handled everything while I just enjoyed the lifestyle. Once, when I mentioned an idea I had about expanding into residential contracts, Trevor laughed and said it was cute that I had opinions about something I didn't actually understand. Owen told him to knock it off. Trevor said he was only joking. And then it happened again the next month with a different topic, and the month after that with another one. Always framed as a joke, always with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. Owen knew his brother was difficult. His parents knew it too, even if they never said so directly. I was the newcomer, and I had learned early on that in this family, you kept the peace and let things go. So I did, for years. But Thanksgiving last year felt different from the moment I walked in. Owen's mother had been cooking since that morning, and the house smelled the way it always did in November, like rosemary and something sweet baking in the oven. Owen's aunt and uncle had driven in from Pittsburgh. Two of his cousins were there with their spouses. His parents were moving between the kitchen and the living room, refilling glasses, telling stories. It should have felt warm. It usually did. But Trevor was watching me from the moment I arrived. Not obviously, he wasn't staring. But every time I looked across the room, his eyes were already somewhere near me, and there was something in his expression I had never quite seen before. Satisfaction, maybe. Like a person who has already won a game that no one else knows they're playing. I noticed him whispering to Owen's father near the fireplace before dinner. When they saw me watching, Owen's father nodded and walked toward the kitchen. Trevor pulled out his phone and typed something. My stomach tightened. I found Owen in the hallway and told him I felt like something was off. He squeezed my hand and said Trevor had been stressed lately about some vendor contracts, that it was probably nothing. I told myself he was right. Dinner started the way it always did. Everyone passing dishes around, someone telling a story about a neighbor's dog, Owen's aunt asking about our plans for Christmas. For a few minutes, I almost relaxed. Almost. Then Trevor pushed his chair back and stood up. The table conversation slowed. A few people looked up. He wasn't holding a drink. He wasn't smiling. He had a folder in his hand. He said he was sorry to bring this up at the table, but that he had found something that he thought the family deserved to know about before it went any further. Owen's mother set down her serving spoon. Owen frowned and told his brother to sit down, that whatever it was could wait. But Trevor didn't sit. He said it couldn't wait. He said the business had been losing money in ways that didn't add up, and that after months of going through the records, he had finally found where it was going. Then he looked directly at me. He opened a folder and took out several printed pages. He passed them to Owen's father first, then around the table. I watched people's faces change as they read. Confusion first, then something harder. Owen's cousin looked at me and quickly looked away. The pages showed transactions, transfers from the business account into a personal account. The name attached to the transfers was mine. The table went quiet in a way that felt different from before. It wasn't the quiet of polite conversation pausing, it was the quiet of people deciding what to think. Owen took the pages slowly. He read them without speaking. His jaw tightened. His mother whispered my name like a question. I felt every single person in that room waiting for me to fall apart. And I almost did, for about 4 seconds. My hands went cold and my throat closed up, and for a moment the room felt like it was tilting sideways. 6 years of Sunday dinners and holiday tables and trying to belong in this family. And now every one of those people was sitting there looking at me like I was a stranger. Like I was worse than a stranger. But then something else happened. Because those 4 seconds passed and I remembered what I had found 2 weeks earlier. And I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and looked across the table at Trevor. He was watching me the way Claire had watched me at that anniversary party, waiting for the panic, wanting the tears. And I realized, looking at his face in that moment, that he had miscalculated. He thought he knew exactly how this was going to go. He didn't. I set my glass down carefully and said, "Trevor, can I ask you something?" He blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. He said, "Sure, go ahead." I asked him where he had found those records. He said he had been reviewing the accounts as part of his regular bookkeeping duties. I nodded slowly, and I asked him when exactly he had first noticed the discrepancy. He said it had been building over several months, that he had been tracking it quietly before bringing it to the family. I said, "Okay," and then I looked at Owen and said, "I'd like to show everyone something." Trevor interrupted immediately. He said that whatever I was about to say, the documents spoke for themselves. He looked at the rest of the table and said this was exactly what he expected, that I would try to explain it away. But Owen was looking at me, not at Trevor. He had known me for 9 years and he had heard something in my voice that made him pause. He asked me what I wanted to show them. I reached into my bag, which was sitting on the chair beside me, and I took out my own folder. I had been carrying it since I left the house that morning. Not because I knew exactly when I would need it, but because I had known, the way you sometimes just know, that Thanksgiving was going to be the day. I passed my own pages around the table. They were different from Trevor's. Mine were printed from our bank's online portal, time-stamped with IP records attached. And they showed something very specific, that the transfers Trevor had pointed to, the ones with my name on them, had not been initiated from any device I owned. They had been initiated from a laptop registered to the business. A laptop that had been assigned to one person, Trevor. Owen's father looked up from the pages first. He was a quiet man, not quick to react, the kind of person who thought carefully before speaking. He looked at the pages for a long time. Then he looked at Trevor. Trevor laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh, too sudden, too loud for the size of the room. He said the records were probably just showing where the approval had been routed, that it was a technical thing, that it didn't mean what I was implying. I said, "I understand that explanation. But there's more." I looked at Owen's mother, then his father, then Owen, and finally I looked back at Trevor. I told them that 3 weeks ago I had received an alert from our bank, a notification that someone had attempted to log into the joint business account from an unrecognized device. I had flagged it at the time and thought it was a glitch. But after I flagged it, I asked our bank's fraud department to look more closely. Trevor's expression shifted, not by much. But I saw it. I explained that the fraud department had traced the login attempt to a device that had connected from a specific IP address, and that the IP address matched the router registered to Trevor's apartment. Owen's cousin quietly said, "Oh my God." Trevor stood up straighter. His voice came out harder now, and he said I was making things up, that I had fabricated documents to cover myself, that this was exactly the kind of thing he had been worried about. But Owen's father raised one hand slightly, the way he did when he wanted silence. He had both sets of papers in front of him now. He was still studying them. Owen looked at his brother and said his name quietly. Just once. The way you say someone's name when you want them to stop before they make things worse. Trevor looked around the table. He was looking for support, the way people do when they realize the room has shifted. Owen's aunt was reading my pages carefully. His uncle was leaning over to look at the bank records. His mother was holding the papers with both hands and not speaking. I wasn't finished. I told them that after the bank flagged the login attempt, I had also gone back through the business accounts for the past 18 months. I had asked a friend, a CPA who worked in forensic accounting, to help me go through the records carefully. What she found was that the transfers with my name attached had all been created during a window when I could be verified through my own phone's location data to not have been near any business device. The timestamps didn't match my presence, they matched Trevor's. Owen's father looked up at Trevor. He asked him one question. He asked how much. Trevor said nothing. Owen asked the same question. His voice was very quiet. Trevor's shoulders dropped slightly, and something in his posture changed. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he had been going to pay it back. He said the business had been doing fine and nobody was going to miss it, and he just needed a short-term solution to a personal problem. Owen's mother asked how much. Trevor said, "Not that much. A few transfers." I said it was just under $47,000 over 14 months. The room stayed completely still for a moment. Owen's father sat back in his chair. His mother pressed her lips together. His cousin across the table looked down at the tablecloth. Trevor said he would pay it back. He looked at Owen and said he would pay every dollar back, that he never meant for it to go this far, that he had panicked when he thought I was getting close to figuring it out, and he just needed to redirect the attention. He thought if I looked guilty, there would be an investigation into me, and he'd have time to fix the numbers before anyone looked too closely at him. Owen stared at his brother for a long moment without speaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was the flattest I had ever heard it. He asked Trevor to leave. Trevor looked at his parents. His mother had tears in her eyes, but she didn't say anything to stop it. His father had turned slightly away, toward the window, the way you do when you can't look at something directly anymore. Trevor picked up his folder from the table. He looked at me once and I thought he was going to say something. He didn't. He walked to the front hallway, and a minute later the door opened and closed. Nobody spoke for a little while. Owen's aunt reached over and touched my hand playfully, without saying anything. Outside, through the window above the kitchen sink, I could see it had started to snow. Just lightly, the first flurry of the season. Owen's father cleared his throat and said, quietly, that he was sorry. He said it to me, not to the room. I said I knew, and I meant it. Owen came around the table and sat down next to me in the chair Trevor had vacated. He took my hand under the table and he held it there and he didn't let go. His mother stood up after a moment and went back into the kitchen. A minute later, I could hear the soft sounds of her moving things around, checking something in the oven. It was the most normal sound in the world, and for some reason it made my chest loosen just a little. Owen's uncle looked at the plates and the half-filled dishes still sitting on the table and said, somewhat awkwardly, that it was a shame to let the food go cold. A few people laughed, softly, the kind of laugh that has more relief in it than humor. Owen squeezed my hand and looked at me and asked if I was okay. I thought about the past 2 weeks, the nights I had spent going through those records with my friend at her kitchen table, both of us on our second cups of coffee, trying to make sure every number lined up before I was willing to trust it. The Sunday 3 weeks ago when I had opened that bank alert on my phone and felt that cold drop of recognition before I even fully understood what I was looking at. The way I had walked through every holiday dinner that year with this weight sitting somewhere behind my ribs, knowing something was wrong but not yet knowing exactly what. I told Owen I was going to be fine, and then I told him we should eat before everything got cold. He smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. And nodded. And slowly, the way a room does when it's been through something hard and is deciding to come back to itself, people began passing dishes again. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Owen's parents contacted their attorney and began the process of filing a civil claim against Trevor for the misappropriated funds. The attorney also sent a formal letter to Trevor requiring repayment of the full amount within 60 days, or the matter would be referred to law enforcement. My friend's forensic accounting report was submitted as documentation. Trevor moved out of his apartment in December. We heard through Owen's mother that he had taken a job in another city. The last I knew, repayment negotiations were still ongoing through the attorneys. Owen and I sat down in January, the two of us alone at our own kitchen table, and talked honestly about all of it. About what it had felt like at that table when he looked at those papers. About what it meant that it had taken me carrying my own folder through the door to prove what was true. We talked for a long time. We didn't agree on everything, but we kept talking. Some things don't come apart all at once, and some things don't go back to exactly what they were. But Owen and I were still sitting at that table when it got dark outside, and we were still talking, and that felt like the right place to start. I don't think about Trevor much anymore, but sometimes I think about that specific moment when I set down my water glass at that Thanksgiving table and looked across at him. And I knew, not hoped, knew that the truth was already in the room. It had been in the room since I walked in with that folder. I just had to wait for the right moment to let it out. That's the part they never count on, I think. When someone decides to be patient instead of afraid. I still think about that folder sometimes. Not the documents inside it, the weight of it in my hands when I walked through the front door that Thanksgiving morning, knowing what it contained and not knowing exactly when I'd have to use it. There's something I've learned about the way things actually play out in life, and it's this: the outcomes we experience are almost never random. They trace back, clearly and directly, to choices. Trevor made his choices over 14 months. Small transfers, careful timing, a steady accumulation of decisions he told himself were temporary. And I made mine in the 2 weeks before that dinner, sitting at my friend's kitchen table until late at night, going through every line of those records until I was certain. Both sets of choices led exactly where you'd expect them to. What I didn't expect was how much it would matter that I had stayed honest throughout all of it. Not just legally honest, but honest with myself about what I was seeing, honest with Owen, even when I didn't have all the answers yet, honest about the fact that something was wrong long before I could prove it. That kind of integrity, the kind that holds even when nobody's watching and nothing's been proven yet, turned out to be the only thing I actually had in that moment at the table. And it was enough. The other thing that mattered was being willing to actually think, not just feel. Think. When I got that bank alert 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, my first instinct was to dismiss it. A glitch, probably, easy to ignore. But something in me pushed back against that, and I sat with it, and I asked questions, and I followed the thread carefully instead of letting fear or wishful thinking tell me what the answer should be. That kind of clear headed patience, the willingness to look at something carefully before reacting, is harder than it sounds when you're frightened and the stakes are personal. But it's the difference between walking into that dinner with a folder and walking in with nothing. And then there's the part that took the most out of me: staying steady when every person at that table had already decided what they thought. That moment when Owen's arm went stiff and his mother whispered my name like a question. I felt it physically. That's not something you just absorb without it costing you something. But I had made a decision at some point in those 2 weeks that I was going to stay calm long enough for the truth to surface. Not because I was certain everything would work out, because I had done the work and I owed it to myself not to fall apart before the evidence could speak. Trevor counted on panic. He built his whole plan around the assumption that I would react with emotion instead of preparation. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the anger, not even the relief, but the quiet realization that the people who try to undo us are usually counting on us to be less capable than we actually are. Nora, the version of me who walked into that house with that folder, was someone who had decided, maybe without fully realizing it, to be worthy of the truth she was carrying. I think that's all any of us can really do when things get hard. Show up prepared, stay honest, hold on long enough for the room to catch up.